In the 19th century, wars and rebellions threw China into a period of great turmoil. Meanwhile, in Japan, through the Meiji Restoration, they began to rapidly develop, increase their armed forces, and look to expand. The Japanese fully incorporated the Ryukyu Kingdom in the 1870s, and then established their rule in the Kuril Islands by signing treaties with the Russians. But then, desiring their resources and hoping to end any potential threats, the Japanese looked to expand into Korea. However, the isolationist nation of Korea had been a Chinese tributary state for centuries. Nevertheless, in the 1860s and 70s, both the French and the US tried to open up Korea, but it was Japan who succeeded first. In 1875, they militarily forced the Koreans to sign the Treaty of Gangwon. This opened up their ports to the Japanese and, only theoretically, ended Chinese suzerainty over Korea. In the ensuing struggle to gain more influence, both Japan and China sent troops to Korea after the Japanese legation in Seoul was attacked in 1882. But this, the Aimo incident, ended peacefully with the Treaty of Chemulpo. Then in 1884, the Chinese were called in to help crush a coup, the Gapsang coup, led by pro-Japanese Korean reformers. In the aftermath, both China and Japan agreed to withdraw all their troops from Korea as part of the Tianjin Convention. But tensions remained high. Japanese rioted against the Chinese ship in Nagasaki, and a prominent pro-Japanese Korean, Kim Ok-yun, was assassinated in Shanghai. Then in Korea in 1894, the Chinese were called in once again to help crush the Donghak Rebellion. But Japan claimed the Chinese had broken the Tianjin Convention, so they also sent troops. When the rebellion was crushed, Japan tried to reform the Korean government, but it failed, so in July 1894, the Japanese took Emperor Go-jun prisoner and established a new government. With authorization from the new government, but no declaration of war, the Japanese began to expel the Chinese from Korea. In late July, they attacked Chinese troops stationed near Seoul and sank ships carrying reinforcements. It should be said that China had, by this point, bought a large amount of modern military equipment. However, they suffered from corruption, poor training, and bad logistics. With Seoul safe and war declared, the Japanese drove the Chinese from Pyongyang in mid-September, forcing them back behind the Yalu River. The Chinese tried to reinforce their position on the border, but their navy was defeated and they were forced to seek refuge in Wei Highway. The following month, the Japanese army invaded Manchuria by crossing the Yalu River on a pontoon bridge, capturing the Chinese by surprise. Thousands of Chinese fled, allowing the Japanese to capture Dadong without much resistance. The Japanese pursued the Chinese north while another Japanese army landed near Dalian. Their target, the port city of Lushunko, aka Port Arthur, was now isolated, making many Chinese flee in panic again. Those who were left behind were massacred by the Japanese when the city fell on the 21st of November. The Japanese continued to secure their position in Manchuria before, in January 1895, launching an assault on Wei Highway, another important port city which was considered impregnable. Thanks to a diversion, the Japanese were able to land in the Shandong Peninsula peacefully and attack Wei Highway on Chinese New Year. Once again, many Chinese fled, allowing the Japanese to enter the city in early February. With the city's defensive guns, the Japanese were able to bombard the Chinese ships which were stuck in the harbour. On the 12th of February, the Chinese fleet finally surrendered, leaving Japan in control of the sea routes to Beijing. China tried to launch a final counterattack in Manchuria, but it failed, so they had to call for peace. But just before peace was made in March 1895, the Japanese quickly captured the Pescadores Islands near Taiwan. The Treaty of Shimonoseki ended the war. It granted Korea full independence, albeit now under the influence of Japan, and Japan got the Liaodong Peninsula and Taiwan. But the Japanese had to launch a 5-month-long military campaign into Taiwan because the Taiwanese had declared their own independence. Also, the Russians wanted control of the Liaodong Peninsula, so they, along with Germany and France, pressured Japan into relinquishing control over it. This, along with the Russians' subsequent occupation of the peninsula, would eventually lead to the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. As for China, it would have to endure further rebellions and defeats at the hands of foreign powers for a few more decades. In the 19th century, wars and rebellions threw China into a period of great turmoil. Meanwhile, in Japan, through the Meiji Restoration, they began to rapidly develop, increase their armed forces, and look to expand. The Japanese fully incorporated the Ryukyu Kingdom in the 1870s, and then established their rule in the Kuril Islands by signing treaties with the Russians. But then, desiring their resources and hoping to end any potential threats, the Japanese looked to expand into Korea. However, the isolationist nation of Korea had been a Chinese tributary state for centuries. Nevertheless, in the 1860s and 70s, both the French and the US tried to open up Korea, but it was Japan who succeeded first. In 1875, they militarily forced the Koreans to sign the Treaty of Gangwon. This opened up their...
Created using Powtoon.